All right, welcome into another week as we review week number 2, Friday Night Drive here on Shaw Local, and Steve Soucie's with me. I'm Matt Rodewald. Good to see you, pal.
Hey, how we doing?
I'm doing all right. Let's get right into it. It's been an interesting weekend as we've learned quite a bit about what's going on around the state of Illinois, and let's start with just some of the surprises, the teams that have come out unscathed a little bit. And I think the first one you think of with all the things that happened this weekend, it's hard to ignore the Friend Vikings and how that they're 2-0. Johnny O'Brien, Johnny on the spot, off to the kind of start you expect a guy who's a Division I quarterback to have.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about it a lot in terms of what the mid suburban West Conference looks like right now, and you kind of gotten used to kind of the pecking order of that league, and this year it doesn't look like you can count on almost anything. I mean, we have 4 undefeated teams in that conference. One of them is Fremd. One of them is Schaumburg, which is another team in that conference that has kind of found itself at the bottom of that league. So very interesting when you look at it in the grand scheme of things that you have, 5 teams in this, and 5 or maybe even all 6 teams in this league that can make a push at the playoffs. It's going to be hard for Conant now sitting at 0-2. But you also have to consider the fact that Conant already has 15 playoff points. So obviously they played some people in the non-conference schedule too, so they might be able to factor into the mix as well. So it looks like that league is going to be a league full of mayhem this year. And Fremd and once again Schaumburg are 2 teams that have found themselves at the bottom of the conference for the last couple of years. Look like they're ready to try to climb a few rungs.
I think we're going to spend a lot of time talking about Fremd over the course of the next couple of weeks. So I want to spend a moment on the Saxons. And what are people telling you about what's working for Schaumburg and why they're 2-0? What's changed for them? What's worked for them both offensively and defensively that you can tell so far?
As far as I can tell, just based on the limited information that I have on that, it looks like they're playing some pretty good defense because – I mean, holding an Antioch program to 7 points in the opening week of the season, and that Antioch team historically is a high-scoring, prolific offense. I know they've got some changes that they had to make, but it definitely seems like right now. And, the fact that probably gave them significant amounts of confidence because they roll into that week 2 game against Elk Grove. They squeak that win out. And, in past years, maybe this was a program that would have said, maybe would have folded up in a close game because they had the confidence bursting that they could get it done against a good opponent. They were able to finish off that win and nip Elk Grove by a point. So now they go into week 3 at 2-0 against a Niles North program that frankly is struggling a bit. Follow that up with a Niles West program that also is not really playing all that well right now and historically hasn't been that strong. I mean, there's a real conceivable opportunity for Schaumburg to go into the conference schedule at 4-0, which is something you wouldn't really have bet on at all as a possibility heading into the year.
And if you look deeper into that schedule, Palatine awaits. Okay, so maybe we check that as an L. But you got Conant on the other side of that. And then heading into the onslaught that is Barrington and Fremd in back-to-back weeks, you could be looking at a 5-1 team. And at 2-0, it's one thing to have that confidence that, okay, we got things going. When you're talking about it as you leak into October at 5-1, that's a very different type of confidence we're talking about for a team like the Saxons that hasn't been in the postseason in quite a while, hadn't had a winning season in a long time.
Yeah, and it's one of those things. Momentum, I think, in high school football is almost more important at that level than almost any other one. Like if you start to get that belief, I mean, let's be honest, you don't often really know who you're lining up against on the other side. So the fact that you believe, hey, we can beat anybody we play, you might not know better, like to be completely honest with you, that the guy on the other side of you is absolutely loaded. I mean, it's definitely a situation where that confidence can snowball, and that's why you honestly see a lot of the same teams repeating over and over and over again because they have that belief in their program and their systems. Hey, we did this last year. Why can't we do it again?
So one more thing with the Mid-Suburban West, just because you want to circle week number 6, Barrington at Fremd. It's a road game in that rivalry, and boy, the rivalry is going to be back this year.
Yeah, it certainly does look like that. And Barrington's off to an exceptional start, 105 points through 2 games. So obviously they've got that offense clicking. So that should be an interesting kind of contrast in styles because Frem's played really good defense so far.
You and I spent some time on Friday night talking about some of the teams that it's nice to see in the mix. And we talked a little bit about Schaumburg, but let's go deeper than that. Let's start with a Fenton team that's hadn't been in the postseason since 2013. And, of course, a 10-game losing streak coming in. They're 2-0, and I think they're the perfect reason why the Upstate 8 needed to get out of their schedule, out of their locked schedule, so they can go get some teams to get some confidence to build some programs in that conference.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting situation when you look at the Upstate 8, particularly in the East Division with Fenton at 2-0. There's a couple of other programs in that division that I feel like they can still compete with. So getting out of the box at 2-0 and then going into league play, there are a few teams in there that I don't think that they're quite ready to clear that hurdle. Glenbard East and Glenbard South, for example. Right. But the other ones, it's kind of wide open in there. I know West Chicago had a resurgent season last year, getting themselves into the playoffs. But other than that, I mean, Riverside Brookfield's kind of a wild card. They haven't been with these teams in a while. But there's some teams in there, like I said, I think that they can get it. They have the momentum right now, and they can get it moving and maybe get themselves into the mix where they've got a shot at maybe claiming one of those playoff berths.
I think it's safe to say, with the exception of maybe 2 or 3 programs in that whole Upstate 8, that sustaining program numbers and commitment to the program is the hardest part. And so when you're looking at a team like East Aurora, who made the playoffs, can they do it again? I don't know. Can Fenton do it for the first time in a while? Can teams like Elmwood Park or Ridgewood sustain it for a little while? That's why Riverside Brookfield's been so good for so long. That's why West Aurora might have some success here, and that's why Glenbard East and South Elgin have been dominating the league for the last couple of years.
Yeah, it's definitely kind of chaos. And then you look at the other side over there, like you mentioned, West Aurora's off to a nice start at 2-0. Hasn't played the strongest opponents yet, so you don't really know how good they are, but they have some talented players. They're in good shape. But every other team in the West Division is 0-2 right now. So some teams are going to have to, gain momentum by proxy once we get into the conference play, because somebody's got to win those games. So maybe somebody gets a little fire lit under them and gets going there. But I think in the long run, this was a good thing for the Upstate 8, kind of breaking this up and giving these teams an opportunity to go out and play some non-conference games, hopefully against some opponents that they can compete with. So maybe they have a little bit of momentum going in there, instead of in the past when you get some of these teams at the bottom of the division, they'd run into the powerhouses at the beginning. They'd already dug themselves a hole, and then it would escalate downward.
Before we move on here and bring in a friend of ours in momentarily, I want to talk about South Elgin, having seen them in person against Batavia. And we talked about them at the beginning of the season. They scheduled up a little bit. They had Barrington, and they got a 64-burger put on them. And then they found themselves at Batavia down 42-0 at halftime. I think this is a very important week for that program to understand, hey, if this is what you want to do and play with the big boys, you're going to have to come play for 48 minutes the whole time around. And so there weren't a lot of downheads. There weren't a lot of there was natural frustration that you'd see at a football team that's down 42-0 in the first half. But there wasn't any screaming and yelling or anything like that. It was more trying to sort things out. So be very curious to see how South Elgin moves on from 2 devastating defeats in a non-conference format that they're not used to.
Well, I mean, it was something that I felt like this program had to do if they were going to be able to compete. They have won a playoff game or 2 over the last couple of years, but for years before that, they would roll through the conference. They'd pile up these amazing numbers. They'd go 9-0, and then they'd get beat in the first round of the playoffs. So this is a training ground. This is an opportunity to say, hey, we're not there yet. What do we have to do to get there? And now they get into that schedule where there's a couple of games in there where I think that, South Elgin will be pushed a little bit, but there's quite a few of them that are not. So they can take the opportunity to kind of make some adjustments, figure out what they need to do to get to the level that they want to be. So at the end of the season, they're not going to be 9-0 like they have been seemingly for multiple years now. They're gonna the best they can end up now is 7-2. Maybe they end up at 6-3. You never know. But I still see this as probably based on where they've been and some of the other teams that they have left on their schedule. I still see them as a playoff team, but I think this will be a much more battle-tested playoff team, even if it's seeded a lot lower than it's been in the past.
To be fair, they're facing 2 of the best quarterback-receiver combinations that we've seen across the state of Illinois, at least in the Chicagoland suburbs. So it's a tough sledding at the start, but you learn a lot about where you need to go when you're a team like the South Elgin Storm. This is the Friday Night Drive podcast as we recap week number 2. Let's check up what's going on in the Northwest suburbs. Alex Kantecki from the Northwest Herald joins us. Alex, you saw some good stuff this weekend. That conference, I can't figure out the Fox Valley. It's Cary Grove and everyone else trying to figure it out.
It's the usual suspects. It's Cary Grove, PR, who won the conference last year at 9-0. Huntley's up there too. They're all 3 of those teams are 2-0 at this point, and those are kind of been the 3 teams that have been kind of at the top for the last few years.
I saw Cary Grove week 1. They did not have Logan Abrams. I don't know how you got a chance to look at them with Logan and just how different it was. Banged up a little bit to start week 1, but having him makes a whole heck of a difference, I would say, for that program.
Oh, for sure. So they didn't have Logan Abrams, who's 6'3", 235, I believe. Their big junior fullback. They also didn't have their running back Holden Boone. He was in Alabama doing a international CrossFit competition because he's ranked really highly in CrossFit.
Interesting. Hey, Alex, I mean, Prairie Ridge, how have they, how in your mind have they, I guess, transitioned to a new coaching staff there? Obviously, defense is playing at a high level right now. They haven't allowed any points in the first 2 games of the season. You see that as the team's calling card this year?
Yeah, and I think that easily gets lost with Prairie Ridge because they're running the triple option as well as they do, scoring all these points. But like you just said, the defense is, has been as good as the offense these last 2 years. They allowed a FEC low 11.6 points a game last year. And, this year, 2 games, no points. So, I mean, I think their defense, huge part of that team. Defensive, they have a senior defensive lineman, Gavin Tinch, who is 6'4", 295. He's getting a lot of Division I looks. And they brought their leading tackler back from last year, too, Jace Kranig, middle linebacker.
I look at a team like Jacobs, and I think the Golden Eagles have an opportunity to slide up in that to that tier 1 echelon of teams. What needs to happen for Jacobs as you look at their schedule and what they have left here? And not exactly an overwhelming win against Hampshire on Friday night. They've got to put some teams away in order to be taken seriously like those. But what do they got to do to get better?
Yeah, and I mean, I think Coach Brian Zimmerman would say, any win in the FEC is a big win. I know they got Huntley this week, and that's another huge test for them. I saw Prairie Ridge, Jacobs that first week where PR beat them 17-0, and Coach Zimmerman was just, looking back at all the mistakes, the turnovers they had. They had a couple of close drives, get into the red zone, get close to scoring, and, they go, get turnover on downs. Like, that's what's kind of happened to them in these big games the last couple of years. And, they fix those things. They're going to be right up there at the top of the conference.
Alex, let's switch out. Go ahead.
With Prairie Ridge, Cary Grove, Huntley, and Jacobs kind of considered the 4 teams maybe at the top of the conference. In a closed conference, you typically get 5 playoff bids. What I can't figure out looking at the Fox Valley is, who do you think the front runner is for that 5th spot?
So I went into this year, and I think I told you this, Soucie. I thought Burlington Central was gonna, make a little jump this year. I think they've finished 4-5 the last 2 years, just missing the playoffs. Yep. Yeah. They earned a big win, last week against Dundee Crown. They had to get a 37-yard field goal from their kicker, David McCoy, with 3 seconds left to win that one 24-22. Those teams that are trying to, be that 5th team in the conference, like, those are the games that you got to win. I mean, all these games are going to be close. I know Burlington brought back a lot from last year. And like I said, they were so close last year, so close the year before. I know that team's, really gunning for the playoffs this year.
Yeah, 2 years ago they got 4-4 after beating Cary Grove in overtime in week 8, and then stumbled at McHenry to get knocked out of the playoffs. Last year, a little more conventional, trying to knock out Huntley to get to 5-4, couldn't do it. So they're trying to get to 5 wins at Central, and it's been kind of tough sledding as they are starting to make some progress in that conference. I want to switch over to the Kishwaukee River because Soucie and I want to give some love to the Harvard Hornets, 2-0. Yeah, 20-game losing streak. Forget all about that now. They're 2-0. We're talking playoffs now, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at the Kishwaukee River Conference, and I don't really know who the front runner is. I mean, going into the year, I would easily have said Richmond Burton, but even this last week, Richmond went down to Quincy Notre Dame and struggled. I forget the score of that. I think it was 22-10, I believe. And they scored their last they scored their last touchdown, I think, pretty late in the game. And the first week they beat Marion 21-7. Last year that was a game I think they won pretty handily. I mean, they lost a good amount of talent from last year. But yeah, like you said, I want to give credit to the Hornets, enter the year on a 20-game losing streak, win their first 2 games. They won the first game 42-7 over Lyle. Last week it was 21-14 over Reed Custer. Senior Adam Cook, the quarterback, he's had 3 rushing touchdowns both those games. I mean, they're excited in Harvard, and they should be.
And they go to Woodstock this weekend before having Richmond Burton, so we're going to find out if they're any good or not.
Yeah,
it's coming quick for the Harvard Hornets. Alex, what else jumps out at you? What's caught your eye as we take a first look at the first 2 weeks of the season?
I think we touched a lot of it. I'm just really interested to see when these big games get going in the Fox Valley, when we're matching up, PR and Cary Grove. I think next week, week 4, it's PR and Huntley. That's going to be a huge game. It's going to determine, who's going to be, ending up on top in this conference. So, in the next couple of weeks, those are the big games coming up. I'm just looking forward to, seeing who comes out on top of those ones.
Well, Alex, we appreciate your time. Thank you so much for jumping on, and we look forward to reading everything going on in the Northwest Herald these next few weeks.
All right. Thanks, guys.
All right. Alex Kentucky of the Northwest Herald, the new editor, I believe, of the Northwest Herald, a post that had not been vacated in many, many moons for thanks to Joe Stevenson, a good buddy of ours. So, when you look at what's going on up north, let's talk about Richmond Burton a little bit here, because that kind of it sticks out just because the scores don't indicate the dominance that we've seen in the past. We know it's a good program. We know that's a good football team. What do you think they're thinking, and what do you think's going into their mindset as they head into conference play for the first time this weekend?
It's interesting with that program. You're just like Alex said, you're just kind of conditioned to believe that conference is Richmond Burton's for the taking. So when you have to look at what's going on so far, and I think Quincy Notre Dame, for all that it is a pretty solid program, but it's also, when it comes right down to it, it's also a 2A program. I mean, that's the truth of the matter. So the fact that Richmond Burton had trouble with them might indicate that, not that they can't win the conference again, but they might be a little closer to the pack than we're used to. It will be interesting to see, especially when we get into league play, to see how these first couple of games come through in conference play, because some of these other teams are complete wild cards right now. You look at, granted, they haven't played the best competition, but Woodstock North is putting up a ton of points right now. I think Woodstock is supposed to be a little bit better. Just in general, it looks like that league has some guys that might be able to take a shot at Richmond Burton. Might not finish it, but most of them have not had the ammunition to even try to take the shot in past years. So it looks like the gap has closed. We'll see how close it's closed here in the next couple of weeks.
Let's be as fair as possible, because when you look at the schedule, they open their season with 4 of 5 on the road. So they finally get their home opener coming up with Johnsburg this week. But then they go to a Harvard atmosphere that could be completely different than what they've gone to in the last few years. And then they'll go to Woodstock, which could be a very key measuring stick as to where they sit in conference play. But the good news for them is they don't have to go to Sandwich. They don't have to go to Plano. They both come to them. Yeah. So we're not talking about long road trips, and then they get backloaded. 3 of their last 4 are at home. So maybe they're just, depending on the youth of their roster too, could be figuring things out, and just 1-1 on the season. So that's a look at Richmond Burton. You're watching the Friday Night Drive podcast, week 2 in the books as we recap what we saw. It was the weekend of the kicker, Mr. Soucie. I don't know if I ever recall as many games coming down to the wire like that. One thing that Alex Kantecki hinted at was the Central Rockets also got a game-winning field goal as time expired, but we had all sorts of game winners around the state.
And they feel like they were happening like right on top of one another too. There was no gapping of them. Like you look up there, oh, there's another game-winning field goal. I mean, it was just like they were all just kind of swarming all at the same time. And it's one of those things that over the past few years I've noticed the place kicking has gotten a lot better. Like just in general, across statewide, we've had some elite kickers at certain schools in some places, but in general now, like I used to think that, a team had to have, a lock solid kicker to have a chance at making a 35, 40-yard field goal. It feels like they're almost commonplace now. There's just a lot of kids that are coming over either from soccer backgrounds that are contributing in that way, or just focusing on that in particular, the general kicking game. So that's something that like 5-10 years ago, I wouldn't envision that as even being possible, that there were so many last second field goals, and it seemed like everybody made them. There weren't any stories out there of somebody having a last second chance that didn't go. I mean, they were all good. So, I mean, that's been an impressive story just to kind of watch now that teams now, it's in your playbook. If you're down 2 points, get yourself in field goal range. You might have a chance to pull that out. In the past, it doesn't seem like that was something that was a card that a lot of teams could play. But it seems like a whole bunch of people have that in their deck now.
As we were talking Friday night, I think it was, I forget which game it was, but we were thinking, where do they have to get to? And I think I blurted out the 15-yard line to be ultra conservative. I think you could back that up a good 10 yards to at least take an educated shot at field goals. And I'll give you this story of my playing days back 25, 27 years ago on a 2-7 6A team, by the way. Not very good. We still had a specialist kicker back then. That was a rarity. He ended up walking on at Iowa. The name's Nate Campbell, who's a part of the coaching staff down at Yorkville. But he was the strongest kid on the team, and he was the specialist when it came down to it. He had the length. We just could never get him in position. Now, as you see everywhere, there are nets on the sidelines, just like Nate had. You have the holders that are also working with them, and they're constantly working and constantly practicing, and to see these kickers working on their own, they're coming from soccer, and not just the big schools, it's the smaller schools too. And I'll tell you this from last year, being down at the state, and I've seen this for years at the state level, but when you have Wilmington, who's notorious with good kickers, by the way, they're talking about 45, 50 yarders at the Class 2A level. That's when you know that everyone not only has one, but should have one. And if you haven't had one in a 1,400 enrollment school, you're not doing it right.
Right. And that's definitely one of those things that like I said before, 10 years, 15 years ago, this was something you just did not have.
It's to the point where I almost look at the big schools and they don't have a kicker. I'm like throwing my hands up like, you have how many soccer teams? You have how many kids in this school? You're telling me you can't find one? And that's why we also laugh at college kickers as well. So it was quite the weekend. And by the way, it was Minooka, Naperville Central, St. Joe Ogden, the Central Rockets, and a favorite of yours, the Plainfield South Cougars. Apparently, they were very happy to get that win and try and look for you at the sidelines afterwards on Friday night.
Yeah, I wasn't there. Apparently, not real happy with my prediction of them finishing 4th in the conference. So. But good for them. I mean, it was definitely not the best of a season for them last year. They went 2-7.
Right.
They laid a new foundation down there, but they've picked up wins to start the season here over Yorkville and then winning on Friday night against DeKalb.
Yep. Hey, you know what? When it comes to motivation, you do what you got to do, right, coaches? Go ahead. Whatever thing you can use to get going and get your kids going, you go ahead and use it. some of the surprises, and maybe not so much as a surprise, but it's rather the dominance that we've seen in some of the conferences. So the Catholic League has had some dominant performances. Maybe the records don't look as dominant. We know they're going to be a good league. I'm sure you didn't have Marmion as 2-0 to start things off, though.
No, I didn't. And it's like the funniest thing to look at about this CCL at this point, half of their teams are 2-0, but none of them are from the blue. That's the first thing that's very interesting. The supposed power conference in the state, and all of their teams are 1-1 at this point in time. And then with half of their teams, the list of those teams that are 2-0 includes some teams that just I wouldn't have put a lot of chips on them being 2-0 out of the gate. Niles Notre Dame, Bennett, Marmion, like you mentioned. These are teams that I think are okay, but they have to get – it was very important for them to be 2-0 at this point in time. They're going to need that cushion heading into their conference schedule. So accomplishing that, DePaul Prep is another one that needed to go 2-0 because once they get into their conference schedule and their crossovers are potentially problematic, getting off that 2-0 start is really, really impressive.
Yeah, Bennett, of course, getting a win against Moline on Friday night in rather dominant fashion and having to do it on a short week after playing Hillcrest on Saturday. They'll get De La Salle, and they could add another win there before St. Viator, then Mount Carmel, St. Pat's, Fenwick, Nazareth, and DePaul Prep, who all of a sudden becomes a story. And DePaul Prep, for them getting to where they are, I think you had since they've renamed, they only had one winning seasons in the last 10 years. Is that about right, DePaul Prep?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, you have to go back into the Gordon Tech days to find winning seasons on the regular for that program. So I can recall, I want to say it was 4 or 5 years ago, I went up to a Saturday afternoon game with DePaul Prep, and they were playing Joliet Catholic. And granted, it was a very good Joliet Catholic team. Right. But they got absolutely ran off the field, and in the first quarter. So they've obviously made strides up there. The program has grown under Mike Passarella, and they I think they're in position now where they can make a run at that playoff berth, where in past seasons it looked like it was going to be an overwhelming accomplishment for them to even be competitive in any Catholic League game.
And this one's key for them this week as they go down to Chicago Heights to take on Marion Catholic at 1-1. They really need to win that one because the road does not look friendly after that the rest of the way. Switching from the Catholic League over to the Duquesne, I got to see them in person. I noted this on X. Geneva grad, I had never been to both a Geneva game and a Batavia game that started at the same time on the same night. So I did a little running back and forth here, probably a good 4-mile drive. So I made good time. And what I saw were two games that were not close. So it was not fun to watch from an energy perspective. But I will tell you, Lamont, as we suspected, might be a little bit down, a little undersized. They tried everything they could. Defensively, they held on as long as they could. But Talon Taylor is about as healthy as I've seen him, about as fluid as I've seen him. And they've been having him do crossing routes, which makes him even more dangerous, putting him in open field. You got to figure out where he is. He's not flying down the field doing fly routes. And Batavia, I got to look at Bodie Anderson, who did not look like he had surgery at all in the offseason. He was moving just fine. His arm strength was okay. And I tell you what, Isaiah Brown has turned into quite the receiver. He is very difficult to guard man on man on the line. You can't check him. So whoever's going to be able to guard him in that conference, there's going to have to be some bracket help, no matter who is playing both Talon Taylor and Isaiah Brown for Geneva Batavia.
It definitely looks like, that's a collision course that is eventually going to come to fruition between those two programs. But, man, you just look at that week-to-week schedule, and it just feels like every week you're going to have 2 or 3 games or maybe all 4 games where you're just like, I don't know what's going to happen here, because it's just there's ridiculous depth in this conference. There's 6 teams that are still 2-0. I mean, Glenbard North and Lake Park right now are at 2-0. They haven't played the level of competition, but you play who's in front of you. I mean, and like I said, now you're 2-0 and you go into the league, maybe you pull a rabbit out of your hat and you beat one of those teams that you're not supposed to beat. And then all of a sudden, things look a lot different. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. The only team right now that, I mean, is a step behind, it looks like to me, is St. Charles East. I mean, they're 0-2 out of the box, but I mean, they also played some pretty decent competition out of the gate. So you can't just look past them, I'm sure, in the grand scheme of things. Every single week in the Duquesne on your schedule is going to be an absolute war. And I have a feeling as we go through the regular season, it's going to be very similar to what was happening last year in that conference. It felt like you had, all at the same time, it felt like you had 2 or 3 games in that league coming down to the wire, coming down to that last possession. Can someone tie the score and send it into overtime? I don't know how many overtime games we had in that league last year, but it felt like every week there was at least one on the conference schedule. It was a ridiculously deep this year league last year. I think it's even deeper this year, which I wouldn't even have thought was even possible based on how deep it was last year.
And it's impressive, and you feel bad for a guy like Nolan Postley, the head coach of the Saints in St. Charles East. You could feel the urgency from him and his program to try and get past where they are. 1-8 last year. That's not good enough in that town. And so they have homecoming this week, and that's what Glenbard North walks into this weekend. And their next 6 opponents right now sitting at 2-0. So that's how their schedule shakes out. Wheaton South is the last one on that slate at 1-1. So it's going to be tough sledding for St. Charles East. St. Charles North and Wheaton North, that's going to be a doozy of a game on Friday night. I'm probably going to slip over there to take a look at that one for the first time in a while. Ethan Plum is probably the one quarterback nobody's talking about in the entire state after he had a lot of conversation these last couple of years.
Yeah, I saw him last year in the playoffs, and I felt like they were knocked out by Bradley Bourbonnais in that game in a second-round contest last year. And I felt like watching him play in that game, that was the kind of effort that was going to drive him to work really hard for his senior year, because I know he was really disappointed with the way that he performed in that game. He was outpaced by Bradley Bourbonnais' quarterback in that game. Mm-hmm. And that did not sit well with him. And I saw him in some off-season showcases, and he just looks like a guy who's ready to just explode in terms of putting together a mammoth season. And definitely, I mean, he's going to have a lot of opportunities to try to guide that team to some big wins this year, especially in the schedule that they have remaining. But I really like his potential moving forward, and I think he's going to have a very big year. It's just, that's a fun team, and I've seen them in the past, and they never hesitate to maybe make a risky or take a gamble. They're just a very good team in that way. That Robert Pomazak just went for 2 in a game already this season when a kick would have tied it and sent it into overtime. Just rolled it out there and said, "Let's go for the win right now." That's the way they tend to play. They're an entertaining program.
Riverboat Robert, running the program for the North Stars. And we know the Duquesne Conference is good, and we don't know who's going to win that league. Who's going to win the Upstate 8 or the Interstate 8? That's the one I want to talk about, because that league looks about as deep as I've seen that league in a long time as well.
Yeah, it's definitely a very entertaining conference just to kind of look at and kind of speculate on where we're going to go. I mean, there's just a lot of really sturdy football programs in that conference. And now that conference has now went back to itself after we had a couple of years there where they were merged with the Kishwaukee River. Now that it's just those 6 programs, you've got, the 4 at the top, and all 4 of them, I think, have enough of a pedigree to talk about, hey, they could potentially win this conference. So that makes for a really, really interesting discussion as we go. And then, even with LaSalle, Peru, and Ottawa, there are teams that feel like they are ready to maybe try to make a step forward as well. So all 6 of those programs, I think, are going to try to give themselves a puncher's chance where they're at the very least in the conversation for trying to get to a playoff berth.
It's amusing because those the 4 teams you talk about that are at 2-0, and the 2 that are 1-1, Ottawa and LaSalle Peru, one of the oldest rivalries in the state of Illinois, they're going to play this week, and then they're going to play in 3 more weeks because they're going to play each other twice. And I'm not sure they've ever done that in their rivalry's history. I'm sure we could find that out at some point as we keep an eye on what goes on in the Illinois Valley this week.
I certainly don't think that they have. And I mean, it was one of those things that was born out of kind of schedule need in a situation like that. they made an interesting choice to leave week 9 as a non-conference date rather than backloading the schedule like most leagues do. And they quickly discovered that there aren't a lot of teams that are looking for non-conference games in week 9. So that's why we got what we got there. They ended up doing a little creative mishmash to have them move that second game up, and then they bracketed it back and got week 9 games. So it was kind of an off-season problem for all of the teams in that conference. I mean, Morris is going to Michigan, Caneland is going to Belleville Althoff. I mean, these are. I mean, Rochelle's actually doesn't currently have a week 9 game. They scheduled a Missouri team that dropped them. That'll end up being a forfeit win if it has to be. But all of those teams ended up having to get really creative to fill that week 9 non-con game. So it's definitely something I think they're probably going to look at and maybe try to readjust for the future.
I don't want to look too far ahead because we don't want to preview week 3 too much. But boy, Rochelle and Highland at Illinois Wesleyan is really intriguing to me. So I'm curious to see how that's going to go Friday night. Keep an eye on that. DeKalb and Caneland. And, of course, we'll see how this goes with, Sycamore has Muhammad Seymour. That's a nice long trip for them. So there's a lot of long trips to the Interstate 8 this season and pretty much all the way through week 9. As we wrap things up here, a couple more minutes, some nuggets and tidbits. Let's go back to Sycamore for a minute. They had 3 fumbles. They're trailing Oswego East, which is an 8A school. Still found a way to win. They're a gritty club this year. Yeah,
they're doing what they have to do. I mean, obviously they had a bit of an intriguing one in week 1 as well. So there's a lot to be said for being a football program that knows how to get it done by whatever means necessary, and Sycamore has definitely done that so far.
Can we give it up for the Dixon Dukes? A 99-yard touchdown pass, which is a school record. Let me make sure I get it right. Cullen Shaner to Eli Davidson. I think I got that right. But, hey, you know what? When you break a record, that's one thing. 99, you figured that'd be a record. But it broke a record that was set back in 1956. That's when you know your name's going to be on the board for forever now at this point with 99 yards. Dixon looking good early.
Off to a good start. I mean, 91 points in their first 2 games of the year. I noticed earlier today, I mean, I'm not saying they're going to go after Byron, but at least they're setting the tone that they would be willing to, hey, let's go see later on in the season and see what happens when we play Byron. And a lot of teams aren't looking for that challenge, but I think Dixon might be. I think they're ready to say, hey, let's strap them up and see what happens, guys. Let's see if we can duplicate, a nice offensive shootout here. So definitely it's been building for Dixon over the last couple of years. They've done a nice job last year into the second round of the 4A playoffs. They definitely are a team that I'm keeping an eye on in that 4A North bracket. They get a nice bracket. They could be pretty dangerous.
Speaking of Byron, I would imagine Williamsville is going to be a place to be this weekend too. That's one heck of a Friday night matchup, Byron and Williamsville.
Well, you have to like that's even happening.
Yeah.
We had 2 teams right there, 2 elite teams in the 3A mix that both had their opponents basically drop out of varsity football for this year. So they looked at each other and said, "Hey, you want to come down and get this done?" I mean, and you gotta respect that first of all.
I love that.
Both of those teams are going to get their wins and they know it. So the fact that they're just willing to say, "Hey, these were games we knew we were going to win," to put that W aside and say, "Hey, let's go challenge ourselves, give ourselves an opportunity to get this done." Not that far removed from these 2 teams meeting in a state championship game. So, really, really 2 of the top tier 3A programs taking an opportunity to take a bad situation and make it into a really interesting one.
Coaches, if you're watching us, do more of this. We talk about it. We don't want to talk about your 60-0 win. We want to talk about that. That's more fun for us. And we'll get more fun for you as well. Remember we were worried about Forreston? Well, they had 400 yards rushing last week. I think they're fine. What do you think? Yeah,
I think so. I mean, it was definitely a little bit shocking to see what happened to them against Fulton in the first week of the season. I think we'll find out over the course of the year that Fulton's pretty good in their own right, but Forreston did a really nice job of righting the ship, and let's not bury the Cardinals just yet.
Flanagan, Cornell, Woodland. It's homecoming last week. They had military night, so they came out in camo. Oh, and they're honoring the 1974 state champions' 50th anniversary. That had to have been a fun atmosphere to start things off. In week 2, we're already in homecoming season.
Yeah, I know, that's crazy, isn't it? It seems weird that we're 20% done with the regular season already. 1/3 after this week. That just seems crazy. It seems like we just started yesterday.
We say this every year, right? When we get into the first 2 weeks, It's like, oh, 1/3 of the season's done. And, these coaches are saying that to their players as well, because those seniors better feel that sense of urgency, because their football career, they've probably been playing maybe since they were 8 years old, 10 years of football. It's coming to an end fast if they're not paying attention. So that one, and I'll leave you with this in your backyard. Wilmington, 15 straight wins. They held Sandwich to 133 total yards. That's a good Sandwich offense. That's not supposed to happen to, but Wilmington, they're back, and they're probably ready to get back down to normal.
Wilmington took a 42-0 lead midway through the second quarter in that game. So they completely controlled that, and the grand majority of those 133 yards were very, very late in the game, if you know what I mean. So Wilmington just really looking like they've got everything firing on all cylinders.
All right, what's catching your eye? Maybe you might head out to, if you can, this weekend. What do you think for your week 3 as we take a peek?
I haven't dug that far into like what is directly in front of me yet. I mean, it's one of those things when we look at the schedule, I start picking through what is left over from week 2, but I haven't really lined up exactly what my game plan is going to be for week 2. I snuck out a little bit and watched a little bit of an old school rivalry between Bishop McNamara and Herscher last week.
Yeah,
I'm hoping I can find at least a half that I can sneak out to this week in week 3, but haven't decided what that is just yet.
I have been to Herscher. I have played at Herscher. I have never been to Bishop Mac. That's usually it's the opposite, right? Because of how successful that program has been for a long time. I think I'm going to sneak up to St. Charles North and watch St. Charles North and Wheaton North in the weekly slugfest in the Duquesne. But if I change my mind, I might slip over to Canelan and get a look at the Canelan Knights and the DeKalb Barbs, because that's a fascinating playoff point possibility for Canelan as you look at the Interstate 8, and you know how much of a grind that is, and that non-conference schedule is not easy, especially that Week 9 games you mentioned. Althoff in Week 9, not exactly one that they'll be fired up when you go down there too.
Yeah.
Althoff Crusaders, that building's going to be ready to go for a team like Canelan coming in there in Week 9. So I might see if I can sneak one, if not both. That might be pushing it. I don't know. The country roads are not that friendly for me to get that far that quickly. So should be fun. And that's our look at week 2. Soucie, you have a good week. We will see you as we get ready for week 3 coming up.